Conservative. Constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome, everybody, to another amazing day here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider. Thank y'all for tuning in on what is a wonderful, wonderful Wednesday. As always, if you want to reach out to the show, learn more about it, see what's going on, head on over to theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. So I've had a person message in asking for a little clarification on Berea College. Is it, those of you who listened, of course, Monday, heard when I talked about Berea College having this communist group that this college sanctioned young communist of group, Communist Party organization, as well as having a foreign national that is the president of that organization. And one of the points that was brought up, that I brought up, was that, our tax dollars are funding this kind of behavior. And I got a message in from someone saying that, look, Berea is a private university, it is privately funded, our tax dollars aren't pushing it forward. But that's not very, I guess it depends on how you look at things, because the claim that Berea College is private, so it receives no tax dollars at all, is not quite accurate. Now, back in the day, maybe this was very true, that Berea, received not $1 of federal funding. However, depending on how you look at all these state and federal programs that exist now that are taxpayer funded, well, it depends on how you look at those. I look at those money as federal funding. When I look at FAFSA, when I look at Pell Grants, when I look at the numerous of other college-based grants that are offered to college students that are funded through our tax dollars, I look at that as federal dollars, as federal funding. And some others may look at that and say they don't look at it that way, that somehow, even though it's taxpayer funded, the fact that a university is taking those dollars doesn't mean they're receiving tax dollars. But to kind of push back on that notion a little bit, let's actually look at how much Berea is taking in tax dollars. So it may be through a vehicle like FAFSA, but instead of being a line item, because, public universities like UK, like EKU, like WKU, those public universities, they're getting an actual line item on the state budget where they're receiving dollars right from the taxpayer coffers. Berea isn't getting that. It isn't getting a line item that says, here you go, here is X amount of taxpayer dollars. What Berea is getting is these student aids that are being funded by federal dollars. And like I said, back in the day, it may have been the case that Berea was completely funding itself. But nowadays, Berea, if we're counting those federal dollars as funding, Berea is a large part of the way they operate is coming from the taxpayer pockets. Let me explain here, okay? So we're going to go over to Berea's own website. When you go to Berea's own website and you look under types of financial aid, this is right from their top. So many people cite the fact that Berea charges no tuition, and they think this comes only from a only from a private endowment, that it's all donation-based, that there's no tax dollars, and it's free college. However, when you head over to their financial aid, they're pretty clear here. Under their first heading, which says Tuition Promise Scholarship, they say after all federal, state, institutional, private grants and scholarships have been considered, a Berea tuition scholarship is awarded to recover the remaining costs of tuition. Berea actually targets low-income kids that are coming from low-income situations, low-income opportunities, and targets those kids to specifically provide a free college experience, which is great. I'm not saying that's a bad thing to target those kids. However, those groups of children do qualify for huge amounts of taxpayer funds in order to help pay for the college. And Berea is very clear. They target those kids, and then they will not issue a scholarship to cover their tuition, to make Berea truly tuition free, as it's sold as everybody knows it, as a tuition-free college, they refuse to cover the tuition, according to their own website, until after you have first completed and filled out all your federal, state, institutional, and private scholarships that could be considered. In fact, you're not allowed to go to school there, based upon their own website. You're not allowed to go to school there unless you have filled out your FAFSA form. Because they need that money first before they're saying they're not paying, like if it costs $20,000 a year, $30,000 a year for you to go to school there, they're not paying that $30,000 out of their endowment. That's not how it's working. First, they're going to look at, okay, how much can we get from the federal government? And you may say, well, Andrew, that could be there, but maybe that's not a lot. Just for understanding here, the average FAFSA award across the U.S., according to FAFSA's own website, January of 10th, 2020, I'm sorry, this is in January 2021, it was $10,590 per year. That's the average amount of FAFSA awarded. Now, not to mention that now we're talking about Berea College, where kids are going to be above average. They're going to be a lot above average there because their income situation within their family, which is what FAFSA looks at, is going to be a lot different. It's going to be a lot worse off than the average. So if the average is receiving $10,000, it wouldn't be crazy at all to see that Berea College is, bringing in $10,000-15,000 a student in FAFSA. But on top of that, and this is from, once again, Berea College's own website, we turn now to Pell Grants they mention. That can be awarded anywhere from $767 a year to $7,395 a year. The Kentucky College Access Program, that's $5,300 a year it could be. So when you add this all up, it is not hard to see that, and Berea isn't just like, hey, if you get these funds, we'll help you. We're here to help you, or here's a tuition amount, you got to pay it. No. Berea is saying we are going to specifically, basically file these for you. We're going to give you all the forms. We're going to get them all filled out and get them all submitted. So that way Berea College can bring in as much taxpayer funds as we can from these sources before we start to cover your tuition ourselves. That is the way that they're operating now. Maybe it's not how they used to be before FAFSA and all these other places were a thing, but how they operate now, very large amounts are coming in from the federal government. And how much of their overall budget does that actually take up? Well, let's take a look here. So according to Berea's federal tax return, as translated by ProPublica, it says that Berea had $243 million in revenue, with $155 million in expenses, and only has $1.87 billion in total assets. That includes your endowment, that includes your land, your building, and other assets. So total revenue was $243 million. Now, clearly, that isn't all revenue. It can't be from investment funds. I mean, they only have $1.87 billion in total assets. And actually, according to their tax statements, sales of assets, which could be stocks as well as buildings, things like that, and as well as their investment income, totaled only $99 million. They actually said $119 million of their total revenue is coming from contributions, also tuition payments, which could be some private donation. But according to Berea's own website, only 8% of their budget comes from private donations. So that means on the high side, it's $19.5 million from donations coming into their budget. So when we look closely at publicly available information, we can conclude that Berea College is getting $100 million-ish or so a year from FAFSA, grants, and other scholarship opportunities. We'll have a little bit more to say about this after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you are back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. Before the break, I was going over, a listener had sent in a clarification on the fact that, in their belief, that Berea College was privately funded as a private institution, isn't publicly funded. So we were breaking down their financials, and after digging through publicly available information on their tax return, as well as what's on their website, we can come to a general consensus that Berea College is receiving about $100 million a year from FAFSA, grants, other scholarships. And that when your expenses are $155 million a year, well, that works out that you're getting a half to 2/3 of your operating budget is being covered by the taxpayers through one vehicle or another. This does open you up to the opinions of the taxpayers. I mean, I think we can easily claim right here that Berea College would not be nearly the scope and size it is without the fact that it receives so much from the taxpayer's pocket, from taxpayer-funded resources. You can say that, Andrew, these funds, though, are available to any kids who go to college. And maybe this is a good point to have a conversation about why are we continuing to fund colleges in the first place from taxpayer-funded sources like this, but that's a different discussion. But you can say, Andrew, Berea College is private, and I guess that is true in the same sense that it's not given a line item of funding in the state budget like other educational places like EKU, but Berea does rely on those tax. You take away those tax dollars from Berea, you're taking away coverage of about half to 2/3 of their operating budget. You've taken, if they didn't receive a single dollar from the taxpayer's pocket, they would not be able to operate. They wouldn't be able to. So it's really hard to claim you're completely private and not subjected to the political thoughts and opinions of the taxpayers in Kentucky and in America when you are receiving, you are so reliant on those same tax dollars. And this does go to the overall point I made Monday, and this is why it's important that Berea College and many other universities have sanctioned these clubs and organizations that advocate for the destruction of the Western world. In Berea's case, of course, it's the Berea College Young Communist League. And Berea, and the president of that league, and Berea has imported, they signed off on a student visa for this foreign national that is coming in, creating these subversive groups while then advocating for terrorist organizations that call for death of America when he's out there advocating for Hamas terrorists. And all of this is being funded, at least in part, by our tax dollars that we are giving through to Berea University through one vehicle or another. And as I said Monday, these are the actions of a suicidal country and state that clearly doesn't care about its own future. If Berea wants to claim free speech and it's a private university status, then they should stop taking one dime of taxpayer funds. And more importantly, this is why we as taxpayers should stop funding universities completely. How about if you want to go to college, you pay for all of it. And if you don't, you don't. Then I'd have a lot less political opinion on what you're doing. And you know what? Tuition would actually be cheaper because it's not some inflated marketplace because the taxpayers are coming in and subsidizing it like we are. Universities would have to make cuts, and the first to go would be the DEI departments. I'm telling you that much right now. That would be the first to go. They'd be like, oh, we got to cut corner. We got to start cutting costs here. If every single tax dollar was taken out from Berea College tomorrow, that they're getting, they would fold in on itself right now. I mean, that's the way it looks. I mean, they're based upon their publicly available information. It is key to how they operate that they get these federal dollars in, that they're taking in. I mean, they're targeting students. They're specifically, not that it's a bad thing, but they're specifically targeting low-income students in order to get all the federal dollars out of them they can. If these kids didn't qualify for probably 10 to 20 grand, not probably, but at least 10, if not 20 grand in federal funding for them to go to university, Berea wouldn't be able to send them to the university. So it is. I mean, it's taxpayer funded in that sense. I mean, not all of it, but a good portion of it is taxpayer funded. A pretty good portion of it, at least. I mean, if you think Berea College isn't taxpayer funded, I mean, that would be like saying that a food bank that takes your food stamps from you, but then will turn around and serve you 3 square meals a day, but is maybe covering the labor to prepare you those meals, isn't receiving any benefits from the taxpayers at all. Now, what they're doing might be a good thing. I'm not saying I disagree with all that Berea is doing. Just like I don't disagree with what the food bank's doing. But my point is this. is that when you take these tax dollars, you're opening yourself up to the opinions of others. That's the entire point of the segment, was that you were opening yourself up to us having an opinion on you importing communists. Now, moving away from priorly talked about topics, LEX 18 has this. The Nicholasville Police Department is reporting that a small group of elementary students at Brookside Elementary School recently ate CBD gummies. They said a student brought it from home thinking it was candy. Now, those of you who've been listening this week, listen, yesterday, I dug into House Bill 420, an aptly named bill that is all about legalizing marijuana in Kentucky. And this really kind of plays into some of the issues I was talking about. We have some regulatory hurdles we need to get over here. We've got some issues here. We without weed being legal, we have kids bringing weed gummies to school, right? It's it's a danger. I mean, it really does. I wonder how the teacher figured it out, right? I mean, teacher walks in and all the kids start asking about when's lunch. They all got the munchies. What's going on over here? It is out of control, but I got to be honest with you. This ain't the first we heard about it. If you remember last year, you had a similar situation of, I think, pot brownies being brought to school in Louisville public schools. So this is in a state where weed isn't even legal, right? I mean, it's deregulated and decriminalized in a lot of these, not deregulated, but decriminalized in a lot of these, cities like Lexington, like Louisville, where police just don't enforce weed laws anymore. But even with it not being legal in the state, we got kids bringing these things in, certainly bringing it into the classroom. And so definitely need to see some improvement there before we even begin to talk about legalization, if you even think that is a good idea in the first place. Not necessarily something I would completely agree with. Representative Timoney has put forward a bill on name changing, offering an opportunity for parents to be able to change the name of their kids if without both parents agreeing. So I guess right now in law, it looks like based upon, so when you read a bill, you'll see the bold parts. If you go onto LRC, Legislative Research Commission's website, and you go to read a bill, you'll see bold parts that tell you what's new. You'll see crossed out parts that tell you what they're getting rid of. And then anything that's not bold or crossed out is just current law that is being left alone. And currently in law, it looks like there was no provision for parents to easily change the name of their minor children without both parents consenting, or there wasn't a clear-cut pathway to do it. So Timoney is taking a look at making that easier to do. Now, the most innocent reason you could think of, like if I'm trying to put my mind in the mind of Representative Timoney and I'm trying to figure out why he'd propose this bill, the most innocent reason I can think of is that you have children of divorce and perhaps one of the parents or separated parents. So, you'd parents together, girlfriend, boyfriend, what have you. They have a child. They name the child. They give the child the same last name as the father. So very common to do still. But then the father takes off, never seen again. And so you end up with a kid with a last name different than the mother's who, will never even see their father. And the mom wants to change that kid's last name to her last name because she just thinks, I'm not going to keep him having this name with this deadbeat dad of his. I want to change it. I want something different. That would be the most innocent situation. And honestly, that would be not a horrible reason to do it. But this bill has a lot of other, I think, far-reaching ramifications of what it's opening up. And I think that's worth a pretty big discussion here. Because not only are we talking about, divorce and separation type situations, and I covered this before when we were covering some of the divorce law and proceedings, things about these no-fault divorces and other things. Is it, realistically speaking, to our society? You look at our ills and you look at what's causing them. In single-parent households, children without a mother or a father, or perhaps neither, are significantly worse off than children who do have two-parent households, or at least two involved parents. And so the question becomes, does this create more of a signal to mothers, to fathers, to children that they shouldn't have two parents? Is this continuing to manufacture that type of culture through law? Because that is one thing we have to watch with law. Are we manufacturing a culture? But it also does something else. And in this crazy world of transgender children, whatever that means, in this crazy world of these abominations, and I don't mean that they themselves are abomination, but the fact that we as a society have gone so mentally insane that we think this is healthy. What other ramifications could this law have? We'll talk about that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you are back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. As a reminder, if you want to reach out to the show, feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. Before the break, we were talking about a bill from Killian Timoney that offers a pathway for a parent to change the name of their minor child without the other parent agreeing, to create basically a family court process, civil court process of sorts, that if one parent wanted to change the name of the kid, then the other parent could come in and would have a legal recourse to disagree, but a judge would have to weigh in on that opinion. Right now, there's not really a way to do it if both parents don't want to change the kid's name. And I went over, in the most innocent sense of the way it could be, is that this is about, a deadbeat dad or a mom, and one of them runs off and they want to change the kids. What normally would be obviously deadbeat dad in this situation, because we're dealing with name changing. And generally speaking, if the dad's involved, mom's involved, the kid doesn't get the mom's last name. And so the dad takes off, leaving the mom all alone. The mom wants to change the name of the child in order to make them feel better about, the kid's name. But that's a pretty innocent thing. But I talked about obviously that this can create cultural issues as far as single parentness, and that's something we need to watch out for. But the other thing is it creates a pathway and revenue creates a pathway and avenue that these far left parents that disagree with maybe their more conservative counterparts can go ahead and change the gender of a child. So remember, this is a name change process here. And so when you deal with these transgender kids, you're starting to see more of these court cases where arguments are breaking out over one parent saying, no, I don't want you to do surgeries to my child. I don't want you to give my child hormones and chemically castrate them because they think they're a different gender. I don't think that's healthy. And the other parent, who's been completely indoctrinated by the far left cult, says, no, I think that's a good idea. I want to do those things. I think that's what's best for the child. And so these cases are ending up in courts where they're arguing about it. And you're seeing this, of course, all across the country. Well, you could see that this bill could also be opening up the avenue that if a mom or dad is transitioning their child, and let's say Billy John wants to become Barbara John or whatever at the age of 7, Billy says, you know what, I'm a Lisa now. And so the mom goes in and goes down to the courts or whatever to change the name of Billy to Lisa. Well, right now, obviously, if both parents don't agree, that becomes really difficult for them to do. But with what Timoney's putting in place in this bill, well, now when they go down to change the name of the child from Bob to Lisa, well, now there's an avenue to do that. Now, you'd normally say that is not what Timoney's trying to do with this bill, but I would call on him to make sure he files a committee sub to make that clear in law, to say that, this change can have nothing to do with any kind of gender transitioning treatments, that this is only about, these situations involving deadbeat parents or what have you. But unless he does that, you can also assume that Timoney may be doing it for this reason. And the only reason why I say that is because Timoney's track record, Representative Timoney's track record on these transgender issues is not good. It just is not. Representative Timoney has consistently voted against pieces of legislation like we've seen up in Frankfurt that have banned things like transitioning children, like chemically castrating them, hormones, transgender kids in the bathroom and cross-dressing kids in different bathrooms, protecting male and female sports, so on and so forth. He has consistently voted no on those bills. Almost every single bill that's been in that category, he has voted with the Democrats on. So while perhaps this could be just him trying to make it easier on divorced parents or parents dealing with deadbeats, and perhaps that's the case, his track record, though, does pass a lot. It creates some doubt on that point. And so I would encourage Representative Timoney to make sure that this has nothing to do with trying to gender transition children, to add either an amendment or committee sub where that certainly clears that question up completely. A few other bills that we've had recently that had some movement last week that got a committee vote was Senate Bill 45, which is a missing adult bill. I guess in law right now that, like we get those Amber Alerts or those Golden Alerts, but there's not really a full alert system for just a missing 30-year-old adult. Just a normal 30-year-old adult that could be kidnapped, missing, having issues, so on and so forth. There's not really anything for that. So this has passed out of committee, going out to the floor. This would attempt to address that and allow missing adults to also receive the same Amber Alert kind of treatments as everyone else does as far as kids and so on and so forth. One other thing to kind of talk about here is that there's a bill working its way through the committee process that was dealing with compliance, that put compliance and sports betting and wagering as its own line items under so it used to be just under pari-mutuel wagering within the committee, the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission Board. Used to say Division of Pari-Mutuel Wagering. Used to be under their line items of what they were in charge of. And so it's kind of parsing out Division of Compliance and Division of Sports Wagering and adding that into their duties instead of just leaving it under pari-mutuel wagering and compliance. And, not that that's an overall big thing. It's just kind of cleaning that up. It's not drastically changing our unfortunate large amounts of betting situation we have going on, but it did cause me to actually dig into this commission a little bit and look about who's on it. And the board is made up of people that the governor appoints. Basically, right now, all the people on the board own horses or are involved with horse tracks or gambling of some sort. One is just of course, two big donors. All of them, if you look at their donation history, you're going to see they've been dumping some money into Bashir, one of which is one of the Morgans from Morgan & Morgans, who, by the way, I believe it's John Morgan from, those ads, those lawyer ads, Morgan & Morgan, whatever. He's one of the biggest Democrat donors in Kentucky. And a lot of people aren't aware of that when you're seeing those Morgan & Morgan ads, they're a huge Democrat donor, which does lead into some questions because about why our Attorney General's office keeps using them as attorneys too, just from a sheer political standpoint. Like Daniel Cameron, for an example, when he was the Attorney General, his office was giving tens of millions of dollars in attorney fees to Morgan & Morgan to hire them as attorneys. And you just wonder, that's kind of like putting nails in your own coffin in a way, just on a political standpoint. I mean, good on Cameron that he didn't let the lawyers, when he was picking lawyers, their donation history to determine whether or not the Attorney General's office would actually do business with them. That's a good thing. If anything, that goes to show you how straightforward at times Cameron certainly was, or at least his office. But my point of bringing up this compliance group was just that it's a real fox and hen house situation. You have these people that Beshear is appointing that have a financial interest in the horse racing industry that they themselves aren't elected at all, making sure that the rest of the horse racing industry is doing what they're supposed to be doing. It just seems like a real fox, like I said, fox and hen house situation. You'd think that that board should be made up of, elected people or their designee, like just allow every single person on, I believe, the Commission on Licensing and Occupation Committee. I believe that's who oversees that board from the legislative side would be who'd do that. Just have every member of that board able to, appoint a person or they themselves sit on the board. And then you don't have fox and hen house situation. Well, coming up, we'll be digging into, finally, John Dythe's opinion article. We'll have that after this short break. You're listening to The Andrew Cooperrider Show. And you are back with The Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. So I've been meaning to get around to this. I think I actually wrote the show notes where I wanted to talk about this article maybe last week or two or three. It's been last week. I definitely wrote them last week when this op-ed came out. And it's just been taking me forever to get around to it. But we're finally going to cover it. We're finally going to cover John Dythe's op-ed that he wrote. I mean, I know the Herald Leader keeps sharing it online a whole bunch, and everybody keeps, well, not everybody, but just the Herald Leader keeps pushing it out there because they really like what it says. And it's this op-ed from John David Dythe. I had this problem last time too, because like 6-7 months ago, he also wrote an op-ed, and it was also awful and terrible. But how you spell his last name? So it's John David Dyche. And apparently, this could be before my time. I know some of you listening to this may be like, Andrew, we all know who he is. This is well before your time, but I didn't hear about this guy until about a year ago. And apparently he used to be a big political commentator here in Kentucky. So, as I'm digging into this is now the second time. About 6 months ago, he wrote another article all about how mad he was at Trump. He literally was apologizing. 6 months ago, he wrote an article where he was apologizing that he ever supported the Republican Party because it ended up electing Trump. I'm not kidding. That's what he said. And at the time, I dug through his article and I was pointing out just how much this guy, this John character, was overstating his own worth while at the same time he was just debasing himself at the altar of leftism in an attempt to have his name be worthwhile again, even if only for a minute. And the embarrassment would only be worth it if he could get an inch of relevance back. Well, he is back again because apparently that hint, that little hint of attention, that little hit to the veins he got there of attention, that little drug hit he got of attention, well, it's worn off, and he's back. He's back for that dopamine he gets by being praised by all of the same people he politically used to be supposedly opposed to. And this time he's going after McConnell, and I'm not going to sit here and defend McConnell. Okay, especially with what's going on now. I mean, have you guys seen that border deal? What a tire fire, let me tell you. Anyways, but I think the guy, McConnell overall, not worth defending, but he does, and a lot of times too, McConnell, people will say, well, he's done a lot of good things for Kentucky. I think McConnell just tries to take credit for a lot of the gains that the GOP has made in Kentucky, but in actuality, he himself hasn't achieved like anything on his own. It was Trump who did it. The very man that the Kentucky establishment and people like McConnell hate, it's because of Trump that we had the state house. I've talked about this many a times, where we can go through the data that McConnell had been in office since the 80s and yet hadn't won back the Kentucky GOP and really hadn't made that much, or won back the Kentucky House, and he really hadn't made that many gains over the last 20 or so years either. But then Trump comes in and finally the House flips over to Republican. Like I said, people want to give McConnell credit for that. I think a lot of it was Trump is why they're in control. Finally, why they're in control. And I just think it's really ironic that McConnell hates Trump so much. But anyways, so I've done a few shows where I've gone over the numbers and everything else on why McConnell's awful and why he can't take those accolades, and I've really dug into it. But so I'm not going to be defending McConnell here either. But I am going to call out Dythe as the feckless fool he is for what he attacks McConnell for. Now, he first starts off by claiming that in this op-ed, Dythe, and you can read it, it's in the Herald Leader, Dythe starts off by claiming that some national media outlet had asked him to write a pre-obituary for when McConnell dies. So like, hey, can you write an article or be prepared to write an article about McConnell that we can publish the day that he dies, which I suppose is possible, that Dythe really did get this call. Though, remember, this is the same guy who gives himself so much credit for Trump's win that he felt a need to publicly apologize for ever supporting anyone who was Republican. So it could be he's a little full of himself and thinks a bit more highly of himself. Maybe the call was, hey, would you be interested? Not would you write it? But, whatever. Let's just take it at face value. So he says he turned it down because basically if he has nothing nice to say, then he shouldn't write it after McConnell has passed, and he wants to say it to his face. So he said that I'm not going to write an obituary for McConnell because I don't like McConnell, and I got things to say about McConnell, but I'm going to say it to his face because, that's what I'm supposed to do. That's proper decorum. So he did say it to McConnell's face, I guess, publicly, in a newspaper, in an op-ed that he wrote, that he is unsure if McConnell will ever even read. So what did this op-ed say? Well, first he says that McConnell and himself, can't forget about himself there. Dythe can't, Johnny boy here can't forget about himself. That's the entire reason why he writes for himself. Misunderstood just how dangerous the Tea Party faction was. The party that gave us Thomas Massie, Rand Paul, the Tea Party that, while Barr is definitely not a Tea Party member, their grassroots effort is what gave the Republicans the 6th district in Kentucky in the first place. He says that he is that entire faction was very dangerous to the Republican Party, and they should never embraced it, which tells you exactly where this guy's head is at. He then goes on to claim that McConnell sold himself out to Trump in order to get a conservative majority on the Supreme Court to make himself a quote-unquote person of consequence into the future, for McConnell to make himself a person of consequence into the future. A move that Johnny Boy here, John Dythe, the author of the op-ed, also said caused long-term damage to the credibility and public perception of the Supreme Court as a judicial rather than political body that is so critically important to the country, especially in the times of constitutional crisis. And the article, that's what he said. I mean, that's what he said in the article. He said that somehow it's Republicans who have caused the long-term damage to our national Supreme Court. Not the liberals who politicize the court. I mean, the minute that they found some right to kill babies and for gay men to get married in a constitution that mentions neither of these words or anything to do with medical at all in it, or the word marriage. The word marriage is also not in the Constitution, in the sense that, getting married to one another. It was, though, somehow Dythe thinks it was the Republicans who have politicized the Supreme Court. And to back up his claim, does he somehow try to point to how the Supreme Court has become political? Does he point to evidence that since Trump took office and appointed these justices, it has now become a political body? Well, he never says in the article any evidence. He just says it. He just says that Donald Trump, who McConnell enabled, made the Supreme Court more political with no supporting evidence, no supporting examples, nothing to point to how just appointing people made it somehow political. He just, at that point, just sounds like an emotional teenage girl instead of someone with a, journalistic standard. I mean, I literally listed more claims to prove how the court has been politicized by the left long before Trump, things like gay marriage and Roe v. Wade and so on and so forth, than he did in his entire article. Like in 2 minutes, I did that. So from here, Dythe decides he's going to go ahead and just dive into more whining and moaning about McConnell being too nice to Trump, which is what an odd claim, right? I know when I think of McConnell, I think of somebody who's way too nice to Trump, but that's what John Dythe thinks. So did he say of anything of real importance, or does he even reference McConnell much beyond this point? No, of course not. Because this wasn't for me or even McConnell. This was for Dythe to feel special and important again. And the only way he's felt special and important and recognized recently was by attacking Trump. So if he wanted to write an article about how bad McConnell is, he should have done that. But instead, he wrote an article about how much he hates Trump. It wasn't even about all the negative things McConnell's done over his entire history. Things that really did affect Kentucky for the negative. Things like passing the Clean Air Act that killed our coal industry. Things like moving our tobacco industry out of Kentucky. Things that really affected the economics of Kentucky. That's not the reason he dislikes him. He just dislikes him because of Trump. Because that's it. John has got Trump derangement syndrome. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I thank you all so much for joining us. Back here tomorrow with a new episode. Have a great rest of your day. The views expressed on the Andrew Cooperrider Show are that of the host, Andrew Cooperrider, or his guest hosts, and do not represent the views or values of the station or advertisers. If you disagree with something on the show, feel free to reach out to the Andrew Cooperrider Show at theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com.